the Lord Jesus and your love for all the saints. And for this reason, I do not see him in Revelation as you come to know him. So that with the eyes
Alyosha stood in St. Peter's Square in Rome, awaiting the arrival of a world-famous leader. When Pope John Paul II arrived to address the audience that had gathered there to hear him speak, Mehmet took out a pistol and shot him through the abdomen, tearing through organs and arteries, nearly killing him. Despite his grave wounds, Pope John Paul II survived the assassination attempt. And several years later, 2 days after Christmas, he visited the prison that held the man that had tried to murder him. The two spoke privately for 20 minutes. And afterwards, John Paul II was asked what they had talked about. His reply was simple. What we talked about will have to remain a secret between him and me. But I spoke to him as a brother, whom I have pardoned, and who has my complete trust. Lord, when was it that you were sick or in prison, and we visited you, the righteous asked, almost confused in Matthew. And the King of Heaven replied from atop his throne of glory, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Today, we celebrate the feast of Christ the King. Yet this image of Christ as King seems backwards. The eternal glory that Paul describes in Ephesians seems, at first glance, a whole lot more of what a king should look like. The immeasurable greatness of his power, seated at the right hand of the Father in heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but in the age to come. Now that is what a king ought to look like. Eternally powerful, crowned with riches and with glory, with all things under his feet. But the kingdom of God is not the kingdom we would fashion for ourselves. It is a kingdom where the Lord of all creation is found first and foremost in the poor, in the hungry, and the needy. Where feeding the hungry and caring for the sick surely tends to the needs of Christ himself. It is a place where seeking the lost, those outcasts from society, clothing the naked, and visiting the incarcerated is to find Christ in the lowliest places of our lives and the lives of others. And what's more, to neglect to do these things is to neglect Christ. The shock of the unrighteous ghost is understandable. Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not care for you? Passing by with ears deaf to the pleas of the needy. In the words of Jesus Christ himself, just as you did not do the least of these, you did not do it to me. When we fail, we are the stranger welcomed by Christ, the prisoner freed by Christ, the naked clothed by Christ, the hungry fed by Christ. Christ has cared for us. So we too are sent out to care for him, to serve the greatest of these by serving the least of his children. In the midst of our brokenness, Christ redeems us, and opening the eyes of our hearts, Christ sends us forth to bear the promise of grace to those who need it most, to build up the kingdom of God. This past week, I was blessed with the opportunity to travel to Minot, North Dakota, a city that earlier this year was devastated by terrible floods that claimed thousands of homes. More than 20% of the city lay in ruin. It's visible evidence of an unmistakably broken world. The detritus of decaying memories rotting on the sides of curves, near gutted house after gutted house, abandoned block after abandoned block. Basements filled with stagnant muck, left months after the initial destruction had subsided. I saw Honduras after Hurricane Mitch ravaged that nation. Parts of Minot looked much worse. Yet amidst the icy winds and barren streets, in a place where failed dikes and flooded neighborhoods shook lives to their core, the kingdom of God was thriving. Congregations that had recently struggled to empty their building of the raw sewage that had filled their basement were now being filled with Christmas decorations, sent from all over the world, free for anyone who needed them. A woman who was trying to rebuild her home only to find her ceiling filled with black mold and wasp nests, providing a warm meal out of her own scarcity for those who came to help her out, making room for the restoration to take place by tearing down the old. Dozens of people flocking from all over the country just to do whatever they could to help the people who still needed it. Knowing I would be preaching on this text, I've had this sheep of the goats passage in my mind all week. And it led me to experience something wonderful that I wasn't expecting in my life. It amazed me. But I did not meet a single goat. Sure, there were the standard frustrations of driving after a snowstorm dropped 6 inches on a morning when you weren't expecting any snow at all, or a long wait at a restaurant that you think should probably be moving a little faster. But in the face of adversity, I saw an outpouring of kindness that could not be tarnished by the filth left in the wake of a tragedy like this. We have the joy to be part of this kingdom that defies the brokenness of the world. Just ask any of the Sunday school students, and I'm sure they'll tell you that we are blessed to be a blessing to others. And what greater blessing could we possibly have than to inherit the kingdom prepared for us from the foundation of the world? When we meet Christ in one another, we see the face of God everywhere. It is when we bury ourselves with other things that we remove ourselves from His presence. When we ignore our neighbors, we ignore Christ to our own detriment. We alienate ourselves from the source of all blessings. We are saints and we are sinners. We are sheep and we are goats. These words serve to remind us that while Christ rejoices when we care for one another, He is ceaselessly inviting us to live more fully into His kingdom. It is not a matter of what we must do to earn God's love, but a function of how we respond to the grace we have already been given. At the end of worship each week, we hear these words: "Go in peace, serve the Lord." This order another every day. A cursory glance at top headlines immediately inundates us with news of war abroad, violence in our streets, poverty rates soaring the world over. And there's not a whole lot of promise on the horizon. There's little hope to be had. But we know better. We know the promise of Christ, the hope we have in the King of creation, who makes all things new. And we know that the kingdom of God is not some nebulous post-apocalyptic construct meant to